Welcome back, everybody. Today we are making this fantastic sunflower paint. Now, if you haven't painted here before, just jump over to the intro video. There are all the supplies needed listed there. We're going to be using a little bit of blue paint, a little bit of green paint, and a little bit of white paint for this background. Now, it doesn't have to be a good fill-in. You are just putting some color on that canvas. These brush strokes, as you can see, are going in all kinds of different directions. Don't be afraid to get sloppy with it and really just enjoy the painting process on this one. A really big brush, a little bit of water to help, and again that's blue, green, and a little bit of white paint here for the background, primarily blue, but just fill the whole thing in with random brush strokes. And then we're going to be starting out with a circle with our yellow paint just dead center of that painting. This is going to turn a little bit green because yellow and blue make green. We're going to be okay with that. That circle is just going to be the middle of our flower and where all of our little petals come off. Now, these little petals you can see here are pointy on one end and pointy on the other end, and a little bit rounded in the middle, getting a little bit wider in the middle and a little bit pointier on the ends. And for the paintbrush on this one, it's just a more of a rounded paintbrush here. This might be a little bit big for some people, so it's okay to go with a smaller brush or a different size or shape that you're more comfortable with using, but just jumping around that circle, adding in all of these petals, getting a little bit wider in the middle, pointier on both ends, and of course, each of those petals is going to connect to this middle circle because that's where the petals are growing from. Once again, this is going to pick up a little bit of that background color if you're doing it while it's still wet, and it's going to make some green. That's going to be okay. We're going to add some leaves at the very end of this painting that are going to be a similar color green, which will coordinate with this. Just think of this as a practice flower. It's not real yet. It doesn't actually matter. It's just for pretend. It's for a layout of what you want your flower to look like, so you can kind of practice it, get everything the right size, the right shape, or if there is an error or something you're not entirely in love with, we are going to go back in over this later on and make a new flower. It will be real then, and it will matter, but until then, this is just for practice. So don't forget to enjoy yourself because you're doing a great job, and I'm very proud of you. Now some water will help that paint move around, of course, make it a little bit more smooth, pliable, easier to work with. It will also help it keep a little bit more thin because we don't want that paint super thick. We have an entire flower to paint on top of this, so if we've got a little bit of thicker paint, then instead of getting those beautiful yellow tones later on, it's going to pick up that wet mixture of this yellow and blue that's under it, so it's going to be a more green in tone. Almost finished with this first step here, which is just the layout of our flower, getting all that petals filled in all the way around, trying not to leave any gaps, overlapping the petals sometimes because that will help it be a little bit more full, making sure the paint's not too thick, and just getting a good layout. And if we're not in love with it, we can always change it. Here's the middle of that flower. We're going to make it brown for now. This is just a chocolate or nutmeg brown, whatever you have on hand that's brown, and fill in that middle circle. Now, if you don't like how small it is, you can make it a little bit bigger. It's time to make the real flower. Now, this is just a rounded brush shape, still yellow and white paint, and of course a little bit of water to help that move around. You can also use the flatter brush that's rounded on the tip, usually called a filbert brush, and of course a smaller one if that's what you're more comfortable with. Now I'm going straight on to that painting. I did not give this any time to dry in between these steps, so it's going to be picking up a little bit of that green. You can always give it plenty of time to dry before starting this, and it'll really make this yellow and white paint mixture pop off of that background. With this being our final flower shape, it is okay to take as much time as you need to really make sure every petal is everything you want it to be as far as size and shape. We're mainly focused on the size and shape through this step, and either going exactly over our background petals if they are just absolutely perfect, or completely ignoring them and making new ones. They don't have to go directly on top of them. They can go in between them. They can be bigger, they can be smaller. That first flower was a practice flower, so put this on there wherever you want these new petals to go. You can go in between some of the old ones, you can make new ones and go in between the new ones. Anything is okay. The yellow and the white is going to be very bright and a great base coat for the rest of our flower, but the size and the shape is all that matters here on this. You could see there a little bit of that background was just showing right through that petal, and even right there. Sometimes this brush just has to be wiped off and we have to get more yellow and white and get back in there, because that background color is going to pick up, it's going to mix and blend a little bit, and if we want it to sit on top, we just have to wipe off whatever's mixing, get fresh paint, go back in there, and just take the time to make sure all these petals are very filled in. We're not going to leave any gaps here. We're going to overlap them sometimes. We're going to overlap other ones other times, making each of those petals pointy where it's touching the circle, and of course making sure they each touch the circle as that's where they're going from, and then making them pointy on the other end that's not touching the circle, and then making them wide and rounded in the middle. We are going to go ahead and start jumping in and layering on some more paint. This is not changing the size or the shape of the petals unless they need it. And we're going to start jumping in between different shades here. This one's a darker yellow. You can get that if you don't have one by adding a tiny bit of orange into your yellow. And then this is just a regular yellow. And then this is a little bit of white. And we're going to use each of those colors in every combination we can think of in order to get these petals filled in and to not be green anymore. Doing just little lines here or there, jumping around, adding the smallest amount of color to different parts of each of those petals by using the darker yellow, the lighter yellow, the white. You can use the yellow and the yellow mixed together. You can use yellow, yellow, and white mixed together. You can use darker yellow and white. You can use lighter yellow and white. Or you can use each of those colors without anything else mixed in and just do the lighter yellow, just do the darker yellow, or just do some white. The goal is to have little lines or streaks filling in each of those petals without any of them being a solid color. Now, if you need to make a darker yellow, again, that is just yellow with a tiny bit of orange mixed in. If you don't already have one, that'll give you a darker one. And then regular yellow, and then of course lighter yellow by doing both of those yellows individually with some white, or both of those yellows together with some white. And of course using some water to help each of those paint colors move around, and then you don't have to really clean the brush out in between the colors. You can just kind of wipe it off and grab a different amount of each of the yellows. You can do this one petal at a time and just jump between each of these individual colors on that one petal and get it how you want it to be and do that all the way around. Or you can do the method I do here, which is where you just take a color, jump around, add it in some places, wipe it off, grab a little bit of a different color, add it in some places, wipe it off, and keep doing that and just vary it between all of those yellows. This is a little bit of a smaller paintbrush that has been switched to for this step. If you haven't done that, I really recommend it. It'll make it a lot easier. It's not a particular shape. It doesn't have to be flat or rounded or anything like that. Just something smaller that you can be a little more precise with. The next step here is just to be adding more colors. This is going to be a little bit of orange paint, and once again, not filling anything in all of the way, just streaking around a little bit, adding some over here, adding some over there, and just kind of jumping either between different petals or doing a little bit of each of them one at a time. Not changing everything. We have that great base coat of all of those yellows, and we don't want to get rid of that. You can even see where this orange is blending a little bit with some of that yellow since it's still wet, and we like that. Remember, if you want it to sit on top, you can't keep going over it because wet paint's going to blend with wet paint, no matter if you're doing it on your painting or on your palette or somewhere else. So if you want it to just be orange, you have to kind of throw it on there and leave it alone. If it wipes off some of the yellow, you can try putting it back on there, or you can give it a little bit of time to dry and then it come back with some orange later on. Sometimes you just throw that yellow back on there. This is the next color here. This is just a little bit of a really light yellow. That's a whole lot of white paint and a very small amount of yellow in here, just kind of bringing out a little bit of a highlight into that flower, getting some more of that yellow tone to show up. You can always go back a couple steps if you've needed things to dry a little bit so you can put some more yellow on there. It's a great time to do that. I'm also defining the tips of those petals a little bit more with this lighter color, since that other paint has had enough time to dry. I can get in there, get a little bit more precise with it. So it's the same smaller paintbrush. Doesn't matter what the shape is, rounded, flat, anything works that you're comfortable with, angled, really anything is okay. Water, of course, white paint, yellow paint, mix it up, get that brush really small based on whatever shape that brush is, and then just gently highlighting out each of those petals, using this to define the tips of the petals. We can add a little bit of this extra yellow light highlight color through some of those petals. Here you can see, jumping back to some of the other yellows we've already used, adding that back in there just to bring some more color onto that petal that was a little too one tone. And then of course you can go back to either of the yellows, you can even go back to that orange if needed. Anything's okay. Once again, just some water, lighter yellow by mixing yellow and white, and going in to define those petal shapes with this. It's a great time to do that. You're doing a wonderful job. I'm very proud of you. These are looking really good. Okay, almost done defining the tips of the petals we can see using this lighter yellow color. Now, all of those little petals that are kind of hanging off the edge, I know the whole thing's not there, but we're going to pretend they're the exact same size as the ones that are there. So maybe adding a little highlight onto some parts of those, like just on the edges. It's a great opportunity that if yours are shrunken down to fit on the canvas, spread them out, give them a little bit more body so that they're almost consistently the same size as you go around that flower. You don't want a very absurd change just to kind of squish them down and make them fit. It's okay if the tips of those petals are hanging off of there. So maybe adding a little highlight, or maybe even making it a little bit bigger up here if those have been a little more shrunken down to fit on that painting. Let them hang off, let the rest of that picture be filled in there somewhere in the outside world. And then adding a little extra highlight of this yellow and white mixed together onto those petals as needed. Of course, jumping back, layering in some more of those yellows we've done. I'm going to keep repeating that, but if you need an opportunity, it's a great time. Here, jumping back into a little bit more orange, just to get some more of that color back on there. Some of it's been lost now that we did all that yellow. This is a little bit of white paint now. It's okay to add a perfectly white highlight. Now this isn't perfectly white because it touches that yellow and picks a little bit up with it, a little bit of it up, and mixes and blends with it a little bit. And there's also a lot of these colors mixed in with my white paint over there on my palette. So if it's not solid white, that's okay. Again, we just want little touches of all these different tones to give that petal a real fun textured look to it. Don't turn that whole flower white. You've done all this work of doing this painting, and if you white the whole thing out, you just have to start over and start throwing the colors back on there from scratch again. So just little touches here or there, jumping around to all of those different petals with that white highlight. And then of course, if you need another layer of anything we've already done, jump back to those other colors, layer them on there, and get them to your happy place. There's a little bit of a gap in between these petals where each of them touch and where the circle meets those petals in the middle. So we're going to fill that in with a little bit of red paint. Now using a very small paintbrush to do this, and then a little bit of water mixed in, just kind of touching up that little spot of background color that's showing through in between each of those petals. And then of course, right where it touches up against that brown circle. And now the goal is to leave the brown circle alone, that way we don't have to redo it later. We can just add this in the in-between, and then as we keep doing all the steps to bring everything together, slowly the flower all becomes one. So it's just a little bit of red going in whatever that space is, and defining the pointy part of each of those petals that is touching the brown circle, not turning the brown circle red. If we touch it on the edges here or there, it's okay. We have another step that we do to that middle that we can cover that up with, but just trying to keep the separate parts separate, using a little bit of red paint, a little bit of water, smaller brush going in there, filling in any of that blue background that's poking out in between each of those petals where they're touching the circle. And then we'll also begin to take a little bit of this red and kind of spread it around onto each of those petals. Now, it's not a lot of that red that's going to go onto those petals. It's just a little touch here or there, maybe even less red than we did with the white, but it is there. We're going to leave the beautiful lighter yellow colors of the painting being more prominent, unless you just really love that red. And then you can get a little bit more assertive with the red, or maybe even some orange if you do that red a lot, just so that it kind of coordinates together. This is also a great color to start separating out the individual petals of that flower with. So if they're overlapping somewhere, or if they're a little bit too close together, then you can always take this red and do a little touch here or there, kind of right on the edge of that petal, just to separate it out from the one it's next to. Now, if you're bad at math, that's okay. That's what I'm here to help you with. This red paint, if it touches the wet white paint or a little bit of the lighter yellow paint that's still wet and mixes with it at all, it's going to make a little bit of a pink color. We don't have that over here on this example painting, so maybe if you've got that going on and you don't love it, just wipe your brush off, give it a little bit of time to dry, go back in with some red. That red will cover that pink right up, but you have to let it dry first or it's just going to continue to mix and be more pink paint that's happening. So if you touch it, it's pink and you don't want it pink, it's mixing with something that's still wet. This is not a lot of the red, and the red that we are putting on there, if you can't tell, these streaks are just a little bit smaller than what we did with our other colors that are the more prominent ones of the painting. So just take a minute, put that red in between where those petals are touching and where the petal touches are touching the circle, and then put it on each of them. And then this is just a little bit of black paint going right on the ring where that background is still showing between the brown and all of that red that we just added. You can clean your brush out, use any kind of brush you're comfortable with, and just put that black ring right on the edge, and then jumping right into the middle of that flower and dotting on, like dabbing to get all of the texture that we want with this black. And then in the very middle you can see that lighter color. It's just brown and white, and we didn't mix those, we just grabbed them both and just dabbed in that middle texture, and then dabbed a little bit more of the black to get that nice fluffy center look to that flower. This is just a little bit of that black paint and some water, wiping the brush, getting it nice and flat, using something you're comfortable making a very small line with, because we're just adding a teeny bit of an outline throughout these petals. It's not a lot of an outline, and the outline that's on there, it's not a good outline either. It's just sporadic. It's going to help separate petals that are on top of each other. It's going to help define some petals. It doesn't have to define them perfectly. You can see some very sloppy outlines. So just kind of putting it throughout those petals to give them each a little bit more of a well-defined shape here or there. Of course, you can use this black outline to kind of cover up or change any little errors around the edges of those petal shapes that we need to. You can even define the little pointy part where that point is touching the middle of that flower a little bit better with this black paint. It's just a sporadic outline, and it makes it a little less stressful because then it doesn't have to be so precise and perfect throughout. So if you're not quite comfortable with the way something looks, try giving it a little bit of a black outline, and it really does some wonders. This is some plain white, and you can see these light little dabs. If you struggled with your middle, that is a great little dab to see, because that's the same texture all throughout that middle to give it that fluffy look to it. And then for just these little leaves that are sticking out into that background, it's just a shape that's very similar to the petals, where it's like pointy on the end for the leaf and then wider in the middle, and then if there were another point to it, like exactly how the petals are, it's hiding underneath the petals. So it's just like half of a petal they're doing the leaf, but a lot bigger here. The green color for this petal is just that background blue, the lighter yellow or just the plain yellow, and a little bit of white mixed with it. And you can see it's similar but not exactly the same color as those little peekaboo petals that we did from that first flower that wasn't actually real yet. So it's just a little bit lighter than that. You can even make it that exact same color by just taking your yellow and blue mixture and putting that together, but just making gently a couple of leaf shapes that are just a half of a leaf sticking out behind a couple of those petals. It's your blue, yellow, and white mixed together to make the green color, making it a little bit more rounded and wide where the middle of the leaf would be, which is just kind of right at the edge of it behind those petals. And then as it gets toward the edge, getting a little bit skinnier and pointier for the tip of that leaf. It's just like your petal shape, but it's like half of a petal that's a lot bigger than what we made for our actual petals, and then filling it in with that green mixture. If you've been waiting for something to dry on your flower to go back in and touch it up, now's a great time to do that if you need to layer your green a little bit to get it the color you want it. And then this is just a tiny white highlight on the leaves. It's a random texture. there's really not anything precise about that. It's just a tiny highlight on the leaves with some random texture to give it a little bit more than just the solid green. And then of course a sloppy black outline on the leaves, just like we did on the petals. You can get super precise with it, like here where we've got the line in the middle and then those like half letter V's on each side of the line in the middle, and then the little outlines that are not exactly an outline, that are an outline of the outer part of the leaves. And that's it. You have a beautiful sunflower painting. It looks amazing. I'm so proud of you. You've done a great job. Thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and we'll see you soon.